She walked into my courtroom like she had somewhere better to be. No nerves. No awareness. Just a 19-year-old in a fitted blazer dropping into the defense chair before anyone invited her to sit, the way people move through rooms they've already decided can't touch them. Her name was Cassidy Hargrove. Her father's name was on 3 buildings in this city. And based on everything about how she carried herself that morning, she had already been told this would be handled. She was about to find out what handled actually means in my courtroom. 3 weeks earlier, at a waterfront restaurant called the Meridian, a floor manager had asked a table to lower its volume. What followed wasn't an argument. It was a performance. A service cart of glassware swept to the floor. 2 tables overturned. And when the owner, a 54-year-old woman named Ruth Annan, who had been running that kitchen for 17 years, came out personally to ask the table to leave, Cassidy Hargrove got close enough to her face to say, "I will have this restaurant shut down before the end of the month." When officers arrived, Cassidy didn't apologize. She told them her father's people would handle it, walked to her car, and left. 3 weeks later, she was in my courtroom. And Ruth Annan was sitting in the second row of the gallery, in a dark green blazer, hands folded, posture straight. 17 years of her life sat behind those eyes. 23 employees. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. She wasn't performing distress. She had simply run out of the energy required to perform it. Cassidy did not look at her once. Before the charges were even fully read, Cassidy spoke. She said she intended to cover the damages directly and wasn't entirely sure why this had required an actual court date. I set my pen down. Her attorney stepped in with the prepared statement. The incident was an overreaction to a situation mishandled by restaurant staff. The statements made to Ms. Annan were hyperbolic expressions of frustration. The family was prepared to make full financial restitution. He delivered it the way a man delivers something he has written many times in slightly different forms. I listened to every word. Then I turned to Cassidy directly. "Miss Hargrove, the woman who owns that restaurant is sitting in this room. She has been dealing with the consequences of what you did for 3 weeks. Do you believe what you did was wrong?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I think the whole thing was blown out of proportion. The staff was rude to me first, and someone needed to hear that." The gallery went completely still. I looked at her for a long moment before I spoke. "Miss Hargrove, you are not in your father's building right now. You are not in your family's restaurant or your family's car or any room in your family's life where the name Hargrove changes how things work. You are in this courtroom. And in this courtroom, what your father's people said about handling this does not change what you did. And it does not change what this court is going to do about it." Something crossed her face. Not remorse. I want to be precise about that. What crossed her face was the specific expression of someone who has just encountered, possibly for the first time in her public life, a room that is operating by rules she has not already negotiated around. She was recalibrating, deciding whether the room was serious. She decided to test it. "You know what? I've sat here and I've been completely cooperative, and I think you need to." I raised one hand. "Miss Hargrove, stop." She stopped. The courtroom was completely still. Her attorney's hands were flat on the table, not moving. He has been managing this family's legal problems for 8 years. He knew what kind of moment this was. He was not going to intervene. Cassidy sat there with her sentence still unfinished, looking at me with the expression of someone who had just stopped mid-sentence for the first time she could remember and wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. I reached for Ruth Annan's victim impact statement and read it into the record. Ruth didn't write it as a financial accounting, though those numbers are there. The wine glasses, the water, the tablecloths, the cracked chair base, the 4 tables that left before their food arrived. All of it documented. All of it matters. But that's not why she wrote it. She wrote it to describe what it feels like to watch someone destroy something you built with your own hands, in front of your staff, in front of your customers, while telling you to your face they'll take the rest of it before the month is out. 17 years. A catering operation built in a leased commercial kitchen, grown from nothing into a waterfront restaurant. 23 people whose livelihoods depend on decisions she makes every single day. She wrote about the 3 weeks since, the sleeplessness, replaying the moment she came out of her kitchen and saw what was happening. And then she wrote the paragraph I will not forget. 2 of her servers, both of them had worked at the Meridian for more than 4 years, came to her separately in the days after the incident and asked quietly whether the restaurant was really going to be shut down. Because they had heard. Because word gets around. She wrote about what it cost her to stand in front of each of them and answer that question. To be responsible for 23 people's livelihoods while a 19-year-old girl's threat was still sitting in the air unresolved. I read all of it without inflection, without pause, without looking up. When I finished, I set the statement down and looked at Cassidy. Her jaw was set. Her hands were on the table. But something had shifted. Not contrition, not yet. The first hairline fracture in the performance of indifference she had been maintaining since she dropped into that chair. I found Cassidy Hargrove guilty on all 3 counts. The sentence had 5 parts, and I intended every single one of them to be understood as deliberate. $15,000 paid directly to Ruth Annan, documented property damages and estimated business loss. 300 hours of community service at 3 specific small businesses in the city. Businesses built by people who started with nothing and are working to keep what they built. Actual shifts. Actual work. Hours logged and verified by the owners themselves. A formal written apology to Ruth Annan, reviewed by this court for authenticity before delivery, delivered in person at the Meridian, in front of her staff. Mandatory completion of a conflict resolution and anger management program, with documented proof submitted to this court. And a 1-year suspended sentence on the criminal threatening charge, activated immediately, without additional hearing, upon any failure to complete any single element of this sentence. Her attorney argued the sentence was disproportionate for a first offense with no prior record. I said, your client swept glassware to the floor of a woman's business, overturned tables, and told a 54-year-old owner of 17 years that she would destroy what that woman had built. This sentence is not about what your client did for the first time. It is about what she needs to understand before she does it again. He sat down. Cassidy turned and looked toward the back of the gallery. Elliot Hargrove had been sitting in the last row since before the hearing began. A tall man on a hard wooden bench, upright, aware of the hardness of the seat. He had come alone, no associate, no paralegal, no one carrying a document case. Just him. Cassidy looked at him. He did not rise. He did not speak. He did not signal or gesture or do anything that could be interpreted as an indication that the apparatus was coming, that anyone was going to make a call. He nodded once. The specific nod of a man who made a decision before he walked through these doors and was not going to revisit it. Cassidy held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to face the bench. Before the hearing closed, I offered Ruth Annan the opportunity to address the court. She stood. She was brief and she was precise. She said she had not pressed these charges to punish anyone. She pressed them because her staff needed to see that what happened to their workplace mattered to someone outside it. 23 people had watched a girl sweep their glasses to the floor and threaten the jobs they depended on. Those 23 people needed to know that the law considers that worth showing up for. That's all I came to say, Ruth said. That someone showed up. She sat down. The courtroom went quiet in the way courtrooms go quiet when something has been said that doesn't require a response. I let the quiet stand. The fine was paid within 2 weeks. The conflict resolution program was enrolled in and completed within the required time frame. The community service began the following month. At the first business, a bookkeeping and tax preparation firm, the hours were completed with the body language of someone serving a sentence. Functional compliance, minimal engagement. At the second business, a catering supply company, something was slightly different. Less armor. Near the end of her last shift, Cassidy asked a question about how the inventory system worked. She hadn't been required to ask. The third business was David Park's printing and graphic design company. David is 61 years old. He started the business in his garage 22 years ago and has run it as a sole proprietor ever since. When Cassidy arrived, He didn't know she was the daughter of anyone in particular. She was just a young woman assigned to help for a few weeks. On her final scheduled shift, there was a client order due the following morning that David hadn't finished. Cassidy stayed 2 hours past the time she was required to stay. She helped him complete the order. She did not tell anyone she had done this. The written apology to Ruth Annan was delivered on a Tuesday morning, 8:15 a.m., before the restaurant opened. 8 members of staff were present. This court reviewed the letter before delivery, reviewed it to ensure it reflected a genuine account of what Cassidy had done and what it had cost, rather than a document designed to perform accountability using as few words as possible. It passed review. Not because it was eloquent. It wasn't. It was awkward and insufficient, the way all genuine apologies are insufficient. It read like something written by someone trying to say a true thing who did not yet have all the words for it. Ruth Annan received it. She read it. She thanked Cassidy. Then she walked back to her kitchen because the restaurant opens at 11 and there was work to do. 6 months after sentencing, at a family dinner, Cassidy told Elliot Hargrove she had been thinking about working in small business development. She said she had spent 8 months in rooms with people who had built things from nothing, and she found she wanted to understand how that worked. Elliot Hargrove said, "Good. Start somewhere and build something." A few weeks later, a letter arrived at this courthouse. The return address was a printing and graphic design company on the city's east side. It was from David Park. He wrote about a young woman who had arrived at his shop for a community service assignment and had, over the course of her hours there, become someone he noticed. Not because she was exceptional, not because she performed enthusiasm, because she paid attention. Because on her final scheduled shift, when he was behind on a client order due the following morning, she had stayed 2 hours past the time she was required to be there and helped him finish it. She hadn't mentioned it afterwards. She had simply stayed, done the work, and left. He wanted me to know. I keep Ruth Annan's impact statement in the top drawer of my desk. Not the financial accounting, the paragraph about the 2 servers who came to her separately and asked quietly whether the restaurant was really going to close. There is a question this bench cannot answer. Whether Cassidy Hargrove will carry what she found in those 3 small businesses in David Park's print shop at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night, finishing an order for a man who started his company in his garage, or whether she will set it down somewhere and return to who she was before she walked through my doors. I cannot know that. No sentence can guarantee that. But there is a question this bench can answer. Ruth Annan's restaurant is open. 23 people are working. A client order was delivered on time because someone stayed 2 hours past when she was required to stay and didn't tell anyone. Someone showed up. The sentence was the correct sentence. That is what this bench is for.